of our presentation is a computer-aided study of the ideational metafunction in the Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood. The purpose corresponds to the topic. We attempt to investigate how meanings are construed in the narrative by conducting the computer-aided study of the ideational metafunction in the novel under study. Within systemic functional linguistics, they distinguish three language metafunctions, such as ideational, interpersonal, and textual. Ideational metafunction is associated with the perception of text as a reflection of human experience. Its linguistic manifestation is ensured by different alternating types of processes in the text. And the functional semantic category, which reflects the unfolding of the process through the time, its transference from the subject to the object is transitivity. Thus, the study of ideational metafunction is often referred to as transitivity analysis. The objectives of the study are as follows. First, we attempt to elaborate and test a transferable computer-aided methodology. Then to conduct the statistical analysis of the distribution of the verbs in the narrative under study, to account for the quantitative findings, making conclusions and generalizations regarding the realization of the ideational metafunction, and to assess the advantages and shortcomings of the methodology applied. The method used here stems from the fact that individual verb forms or groups of verbs testifying to the realization of different process types are mutually related. They normally occur close, find the text, form clusters, precede to follow other verbs, form collocations testifying to paradigmatic and syntagmatic relations of different types. Thus, density-based clustering is aimed at the identification of the verb grouped in the areas of their high concentration in the text. On the successful completion of our experiment, conclusions are drawn regarding the prevalence and variation of different types of processes throughout the body of the text, and as a result, regarding the realization of the ideational metafunction in the novel under study. The research consists of the following stages. First, we establish the frequency of use of verb lemmas in the work, identifying the most frequent verbs, and pointing out the peculiarities of the author's choice of a typically frequent words, by comparing the findings with the ones obtained from the general corpus of fiction. Then we categorize the verbs based on the prototypical processes and identify the respective lexicosemantic groups of verbs according to the Hallidaean process typology. The Voyant tool is used to segment the text of the novel into equal parts and determine the distribution of verb forms across the text segments. Then we use unsupervised machine learning methods and techniques to establish differences and similarities in data distribution and identify their correlation, clustering, and trends. Finally, we interpret the results of the analysis, attempt to assess its strengths and weaknesses. The typology of processes used in this research was elaborated by Michael Halliday. It's a famous typology, so he distinguishes 6 types of clauses or processes, such as material, existential, relational, verbal, mental, and behavioral, which are expressed by different verbs. In our novel, the distribution of different types of processes is as follows. As you can see from the chart, material processes prevail, then come relational, mental processes, and verbal processes. Here you can see the examples of the verbs which are used to express different types of processes. They are provided in the discerning order in accordance with their normalized frequencies. And we can see that some groups are larger than others. Some verbs have higher frequencies than others, but we can also see that some verbs are hard to classify, such as the verb to be, which can be at the same time a relational process and an existential process, for example. Thus, we tried to follow the distribution of all these verbs throughout the text of the novel. And for example, here you can see the distribution of mental processes throughout the narrative. So they appear, they're distributed more or less evenly. Some prevail at the beginning of the novel, some at the end of the novel. Some occur in the middle of the novel. It's worth mentioning that attention is paid not to lemmas, but to individual verb forms. Then we can see the distribution of verbal processes in the novel. We can see that the highest frequency has the verb said, the verb form said, and we can compare its distribution with some other forms of verbal processes. We have also established that verbal and mental processes appear interchangeably. The Pearson correlation coefficient shows the inverse correlation between verbal and mental processes, and this is a kind of significant finding. We can see that when the verb said, for example, is used in the narrative, the frequency of the use of the verb know, which is the most frequent mental verb form, drops, and vice versa. Then we follow the distribution of other types, such as existential processes, mostly in the construction there is, there are. We can see that existential processes prevail at the beginning of the narrative as they introduce the characters, the setting of the novel. Then we can see the distribution of the behavioral processes, which are distributed more or less evenly throughout the body, though some of them stand out, such as the verb to sleep. And finally, we can draw some conclusions. The existential processes prevail at the beginning of the text. The material processes are the most diverse and distributed evenly throughout the text, featuring the highest degree of transitivity. The verbal and mental verbs show a tendency towards inverse correlation. The behavioral processes are used as a means of backgrounding. The relational verbs need either further manual research or more sophisticated techniques for the automated sense disambiguation. Of course, the methodology has the advantages and disadvantages. Here you can see the advantages of the methodology and the caveats of the methodology, and the following conclusions can be drawn. The temporal structure of the narrative as a series of consecutive linear events is mainly conveyed by material processes profiled by the corresponding verbs. The descriptive structure, denoting the context in which the events of the story take place, is normally expressed by means of other process types with lower transitivity, such as existential, relational, and behavioral. The conducted statistical analysis proved to be effective in terms of studying the linear assembly of the different types of processes in the narrative. In general, we observe the tendency that all processes are represented evenly throughout the body of the text, but with different frequencies of individual verb forms. The analysis of the data correlation revealed their interdependencies, intricate semantic and structural relations within the text, often type subliminal, and the clustering of the data appears to show the prominence of certain units performing the function of foregrounding. Thank you for your attention.